Hello, Internet friends. This is
So,
a fun little podcasty type Q&A conversation between myself, Coach Beast Eric Bodhorn, and friend Beast Chance Mitchell. Both are incredibly impressive lifters and coaches, and I think
Debatable.
there goes that. I think very highly of their opinions, even in instances where we disagree. So the plan for now is to have a little conversation with these guys and get some opinions, and it should be a lot of fun. So, you guys want to say anything, or we'll just jump right in the questions?
let's jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So the first question we've got today came in via Instagram from our good friend Adrian. Said, "How lean is too lean for powerlifting?"
I'll tell you. Michael Panacchia at 93 kilos. That was too lean.
Okay.
Do you know who I'm talking about, Ben?
I know who you're
You know
talking
who-
about.
yeah.
Is the rest of the
That was-
internet, though? You want to give a
They
little bit
know.
of context, buddy?
MP deadlifts on Instagram.
MP
Come on.
deadlifts. All right,
Yeah.
check him out. Too lean. Michael, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, now he's fat.
Yeah.
He's fat at 105 now.
That's super compensation.
Yeah.
Okay. Eric, do you have something a little bit more general, maybe?
Yeah, it certainly depends on the lifter, and I think you kind of experienced that too, Ben, where 205, where the 93s is just a little bit too uncomfortable for you for continuous progress, and now that you've allowed yourself to gain a little bit of weight, not even filling out the next weight class, just gaining 10 or 15 pounds, your lifts are looking and feeling really good. So I think it's going to be very dependent on who you are as a lifter, because I wouldn't say you were especially lean at 93.
Right.
You probably could have continued dropping down without your lifts suffering terribly, but just in terms of making long-term progress, you're probably in a better spot by allowing yourself to train a little bit heavier.
I would agree. And I think that a big part of that maybe people don't think of as much or don't recognize is not just in terms of progression, but also in like injury prevention. Because I think the biggest difference was I felt much more resistant to little nagging training issues from around like 212 pounds, which I'm not a big fan of weight cutting, especially for a 2-hour weigh-in and trusting that my body's going to do something not completely random. And so I think around 212 is about the point where I switch from having nagging like shoulder or knee or elbow issues to where I'm a little bit more resilient to higher volumes of training. And so it's just unfortunate that the next class up is 26 pounds when I really feel like I only needed about, I don't know, 3 or 4. But yeah, no, I definitely think that's a factor. In the past, I've heard, just as a general like percentage rule, between like 12 to 15% tends to be a pretty safe range for most lifters. If I'm not pulling that out of nowhere, but I can't cite the source right now. I've heard that kind of before, where at a certain point you start to get diminished returns if you just get flubby, and maybe it's the benefits are not going to go up as much. But then Chance will go around the horn here and say like what we were talking about before we started recording a little bit, that how much progress you made from going from 83 up to 93. How would you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I was in a similar situation as Ben. Like, I wasn't that lean at 192-ish, but just to cut down to 183, it just didn't work as far as, trying to build the weaknesses. Like bench, like obviously keeping a marginal cut, a sizable cut isn't going to be, conducive to bench progress over a longer period of time, which I drastically needed. And so something like that, when you have a glaring weakness and your body fat percentage is on the lower end anyways, it's going to have to go up, right, if you want it to improve at all. And it's just going to depend on kind of where your weight class is and where your current body weight is now. So like in my situation, right, I had no other option. I was already cutting way too much to make that weight, and I was lean enough. But yeah, I mean, you have to be able to improve your weaknesses. At some point, the body fat percentage is just gonna like let you down over a longer period of time, I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, for like Adrian's question, right, like he's really lean already, but you know, until he stops making progress, then I say, you know, it's fine. You know, I don't see the only downside would be not making progress. That's it.
Yeah, I was going to say Adrian's kind of the opposite example from where you guys are at currently. He was training around 83 and trying to compete as a 74 while doing that with some pretty drastic weight cuts, things like that. So we had to take some time and get him closer to that weight class because he is a competitive lifter in 74s. He's close to the world record squat. And that was kind of what we were aiming for earlier this year. To kind of be in that range to take a shot at a few of the NAPF meets. So if you're in that kind of situation where you're highly competitive and maybe you have a chance to set some big records, then take your time to get into that weight range and see how it goes. But it's not going to be for everybody. So you have to actually get there and see how it feels and see what works well for you. But we ended up getting to the point with Adrian where he's now training pretty much within 5 pounds of the weight class year round, and his meet performance and progress has been a lot more predictable because of that.
Right, and I think that's actually an important point to kind of touch on too, is there's a difference between sort of like the general lifting population and people who are at the highest level of kind of just competitive elite situations, right? Because ultimately, when you think about it, if you have two lifters that weigh the exact same and one of them weighs that same thing with a lower body fat percentage, then I mean feasibly they'd be the ones carrying around more muscles. So if all else is equated, then they should be able to produce more force through having more muscle on their frame. So like maybe at the most elite level of competition, those kinds of that slight bit of advantage may be more impactful, where for most people it's probably more beneficial to stay a little bit more work more towards continuing progress and kind of being less concerned about body fat percentage when you're chasing strength, and then kind of going for that min-max sort of approach when you get to a level where every body fat percentage may be the difference between your absolute competitive potential ceiling versus not. So maybe that's...
I think you have to factor in the weight cut for that example as well. Somebody who's really lean is going to have a harder time with the last minute weight cut, depending on how much they have to cut. If somebody's already walking around lean and has to drop 5 or 10 pounds to make the weight class, they're going to feel that more than somebody who may be carrying a little bit more body fat, maybe has some quick glycogen depletion that they can take advantage of without really affecting performance. So that's a factor that you have to consider as well.
So moral of the story, kids, it's okay to be a little bit chunky if you're a power lifter. You don't always have to be a ripped, strong-looking boy to be a strong boy. Or girl. Equal Opportunity Podcast here. Is that ready to move on to the next one,
I think
guys?
we covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's good.
All right. So question number 2 from Adrian. How many meets in 1 year would you guys consider to be excessive? So I think the kind of the spirit of this question is, in a calendar year, how often should someone be competing? Is there too many meets? Is there too few? What do you guys think is ideal for most lifters?
Eric, you can start.
I think for someone who's more of a beginner, novice type of lifter, they can compete more often, and just because of the experience of getting used to the meet conditions and being early in their training career, that they're going to be able to be progressive with maybe 4 to 6 meets a year. Somebody who's a little bit more advanced might only have a few really good peaks in them each year. Even though they can get away with competing a little bit more often, you might have to plan out and prioritize certain meets for where you're really going to push it and try to maximize your performance.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on, like what level of a lifter are you, right? Are you a lifter that's competing at Worlds? If you're competing at Worlds, you obviously have to do raw nationals or whatever nationals for your country. And then usually there's going to be like a third meet that'll be, you know, more of a fun, maybe an Arnold, maybe a Expo if you're like in Australia or something like that. Maybe those are potential other meets for you. But I think the main thing is like, are you staying healthy and is your total improving? And as long as those two are being met, then I think you can compete as frequently as possible. You know, for me, I think this last 2 years, at how many meets, Eric? It's been at least 8 or 9, 10 maybe in this last 2 years.
Yeah, I think you did 6 or 7 just in 2016.
And as long as I was staying healthy, I didn't, and my total has been improving, I don't see a problem with it at all.
Yeah. So I think maybe I've probably heard, Eric, you and the other TSA coach beasts talk about this sort of idea before, though, of not of utilizing other meets maybe as tune-ups. It's not always, you know, be putting up your best total at every single meet. Not every single meet is your Super Bowl, right? So, and Chance, you were kind of talking about the idea of having a meet for fun, or, you know, maybe implementing the idea of just using some meets for experience in terms of developing the skill of competing. And I think that can be beneficial, right? The idea that you're not always, the goal isn't always to put up the biggest total that maybe you're physically capable of, because maybe your goal is to go just 9 for 9 and maybe not risk it quite as much, right, on some of those situations. I mean, obviously you want to put up the biggest total that you're capable of competing on within the circumstances, but I guess the idea of training through a meet, a lot of like Olympic lifters tend to do that kind of a thing where, you know, you'll train Monday through Friday like you normally would, and then you have a meet on Saturday and you go and try to hit some PBs, because they always talk about peanut butter instead of PRs, and then they move on to kind of the next thing, and it's much less of a to-do. So yeah, I think the real, I'm always nervous whenever we talk about these kinds of topics that it's just going to boil down to us always starting off with everything saying it depends on your situation.
Right.
But I think that specifically in something like this, how much do you want to compete? Like if you hate the idea of only having just the progression of saying I'm going to do a qualifier for my nationals, I'm going to try to use nationals to qualify for either Worlds or for the Expo meet, you know, Arnold example, like, do you want to be competing more than that? Do you find joy and fulfillment from doing that? Or is your goal just to bring your absolute best for that one world meet and everything else is to tune that up? And I think that's kind of the filter that you have to go through within your own decision-making process. Does that sound maybe fair?
Well, what if we say like this, right? Like, I think for any lifter that's somewhat competitive, somewhat, you know, into this, you know, not just, hey, I'm going to do one meet for fun and see how I do, but more of like a lifter that's, you know, training regularly, I would say probably, you know, one local meet and then maybe, you know, their nationals, and 2 meet minimum, right? Maybe for those kind of lifters. And then, you know, someone like that's competing at all these higher level meets, and then maybe another local meet or 2, maybe 4 or 5 at the end, the higher end, probably not too much more than that. I think any more than that, you're risking, you know, either injury or, you know, more of your total just evening out. I don't know. That's my opinion. I have no idea what you guys think about that. Probably a minimum and maximum.
What do you think?
Yeah, 4 or 5 meets is still a lot. And
meets in a year.
that's basically giving yourself 10 to 12 weeks between each meet. Obviously, the schedule for that is going to vary, but that's still competing pretty regularly, and that's probably still a situation for some people where they'll have to prioritize when they're going to push for certain meets and when they're going to kind of just coast in and put up a total.
So for like a genetic freak like Chance here, 4 or 5 meets seems normal. For an old crusty kill yourself to add 5 pounds to your garbage bag like me, then it's going to be a little bit less frequent.
Some of that has to do with your competitive personality.
That's true.
I think somebody like Chance is driven by competing regularly and seeing his numbers go up and having those targets to shoot for each time. A lot of people, if they don't have that target in mind or that date set when they're gonna go after it next, they kind of get complacent and maybe don't attack their training the same way.
I think that covers exactly for me. Yeah, I mean, if you're only competing twice a year, oh hey, there's a couple months where it's okay if I skip this training session, or it's okay if I move this day around. It's okay if I go to dinner and do this instead. Yeah, because you have another 20 weeks before your next meet versus hey, it's 6 more weeks. I'm have to be ready. I think that's probably the biggest difference for me. So.
And it's okay to have those periods where you're really not focused on a meet. And I think it's probably necessary for some people just to be mentally prepared for another meet prep later on. Some people just need more time in between to get ready to try to beat that previous meet best.
Yeah. Okay, unless your name's Bonica, and then you can compete at all the levels raw and equipped and win them all anyway. Right. So I'm looking out for you, baby girl. What's up? All right, so number 3, you have... I might have to paraphrase this question a little bit. I'll try to. It's common in the community to say the absolute weight means much more stress. For example, 300-pound lifter squatting 800 pounds versus a 74 squatting 550. Even though the 74 kg lift, or the 74 kilo lifter is actually moving more relative weight. Thoughts on this? Okay, so originally when I read this question, I thought of it as an idea of what's more impressive between Wilks or absolute strength. But now that I'm reading it, I'm thinking it's more about training restrictions based off of absolute weight, and I wonder if it's maybe asking the idea of scale, where you see a lot of younger guys or maybe female lifters who have maybe a lower absolute amount of weight being lifted, but they're lifting higher volumes or more frequency, or having more relative intensity closer to their 1 rep max, where they're able to get a little bit, they're flying closer to the sun without necessarily getting burned, where then you'd have someone imagine Ray Williams doing squatting 3 or 4 times a week for the kind of volume that Chance would do with 50 sets of 400 or something. And we're having fun here, kids. It's a fun time. Come on. So
that's actually the example that I was going to use. Is if you think about Ray Williams trying to run Smolov or something like that, that would probably break him very fast. Even though
think about anybody trying to run Smolov anymore and breaking really fast. Go ahead.
Well, no, if you think about maybe a 66 or a 74 lifter who's at a high level but still trying to push their squat, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week at pretty high volumes is necessary to push that progress on the squat. But for somebody like Ray trying to do that same thing where they're doing 4x9 at high percentages and stuff like that, that's probably going to break them pretty fast.
Well, do you think? I was going to say, do you think it's just his pure size, or is it just size and the strength? To say we have a 300-pound lifter, which is not quite Ray, but a 300-pound lifter that's not very strong. What do you think about that? I mean, what's the difference on how much the recovery is going to be?
I think we're talking about the mechanical stress of the weight on the bar.
Right.
Right.
I'm thinking just in terms of things like connective tissue and overall on the skeletal system. When you get into 1,000-pound squat range kind of stuff, even if the effort may be equatable in terms of relative effort required to move something, your max effort is the same kind of effort as someone else's true max effort, right? But
Gotcha.
The effect that it has on the actual body may be a lot more, your bones are being stressed more from, maybe an example is you have someone who's really light and you have them, you unrack a really heavy bench press and they just hold it at lockout. They're going to be able to hold something that's way heavier than their soft tissue would be able to move through space. But imagine something that they would hold that and it's so heavy for their skeletal system that the bones are under extreme stress. So that's maybe something to consider. But you do see that pretty frequently. A lot of lighter lifters who tend to be able to handle more total volume, frequency, relative intensity. Yeah, I think that seems to be pretty common and not super abnormal to me, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
It seems.
Yeah, I mean that's fair.
So those are all of Adrian's questions. Thank you, Bubby, for contributing. I've got one from Mehar, my adoptive Canadian son, and his question and topic is about the idea of training environments, specifically in training in competitive environments, specifically in regards to like arousal levels for optimal performance. And so basically the age-old argument of to hype or to not hype before lifting and training and seeing them. I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts on that. So Chance, do you want to start this time?
I can start, sure. Yeah, I think it's so dependent on how many more cues you're running through, right? So if you have so many more cues for maybe like sumo deadlift, you get so hyped that you can't run through your normal checklist of things that you go through, and you miss a step, or then it just can completely ruin your deadlift. Versus maybe if you get a little bit over aroused for a squat, then it might not be as damaging as it would be for like a deadlift, right? Maybe just because of the nature of it. For me personally, I know that's holds true. I can get way more amped up for a squat, and it's just more of a, I think, mind muscle what's the word?
I think the mind muscle connection was
mind muscle
kind of
connection, but just the muscle memory of the whole pattern. Just it comes second nature, and I don't have to really think about the checklist as much. Versus a squat or a deadlift, it's way more technical and thought out. For me,
yeah,
personally.
No, for sure. That's going to be.
I think
we can
Eric,
safely assume that every single question we answer here is going to be, generally speaking, with specific cases, right? Like.
Well, I say this because I know Eric has way more of a diverse, sample that he's using to be able to say, okay, hey, this is what you should be doing for this newer lifter, right? So he should be able to go through and say, all right, well, this is why you're messing up. He just has more of a range than we do, I think. Me and you would probably just be going more off personal experience versus maybe Eric has more examples to go through.
Well, I could think of a few examples from Worlds, actually, where you see two lifters on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum as far as arousal level. Like, both of them, but yeah, there's one in the 105s, but both of them are from Great Britain. So if you look at 52's Joy Namani, she was basically, between attempts, she was in the back warm-up room reading a book. Just casually, she had like a lollipop or something, and she was just kind of sitting there reading a book, relaxing between attempts, no hype prior to each attempt, and she did extremely well. I mean, she was in position to pull for the win at the end there. And then on the complete opposite end of that, we have Stephen Manuel, who is extremely hyped up prior to every attempt, screaming, throwing headphones, stuff like that. And I think that just shows it's very individual. Whatever it takes to get you in that state to lift a heavy weight with the technique that's necessary.
And I wonder if maybe the kind of the next level of that particular question would be, is there, even with individual differences, if you could choose, like if you were working with a lifter, would you have a preferred, as a coach, where you're wanting to produce the best attempts from your lifter, right? I wonder if, because I know with my experience with my own lifters, I am very much, whatever you need to do to get you there for the attempts, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but if we can cultivate an approach that has less I guess, potential for chaos. I tend to lean towards the lower arousal levels for like training situations, because I wonder if you need to get that hyped up, if you need that kind of external energy to do that, do you lose some potential repeatability in that approach? Is that, for one, are you going to be maybe the idea between like an introverted approach or an extroverted approach, where the classical example of an introvert is someone who gains energy from their own space and their own time, and that sounds like the example of someone reading a book, and just kind of that's how they're getting their energy, versus someone who maybe is in those competitive moments kind of expressing kind of as an extrovert, where they feed off of energy from their surroundings and are heavily influenced from external factors. And so I don't know. And again, we always look through these kinds of questions through the kind of the filter of our own lives and experiences. And I have tried a few different ways to approach it, and in my own experiences, I have found it to be, if you're able to train more from kind of intrinsic motivation and not become reliant on external factors, then maybe it's a little more consistent when you go somewhere where everything is out of your control, and you don't, you can't have the music that is your normal music, or you can't control the environment around you so much. And so I wonder if there's an argument to be made in terms of both can work, but maybe one is more consistent, or maybe not. Maybe that's just me looking through the world with that one particular lens and seeing it as being the more ideal. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, what if we just say, in training, more consistent is obviously more conducive for longer periods of progress. But maybe if it's in a meet or maybe testing or something like that, and the lifter, doesn't ruin a cue or something, and they can show you that they don't mess up, then yeah, of course, then you can go full tilt or whatever. It's, but consistent, for, like you said, consistent, like the repeatability of your cues, all your technique, that's, the number one, I think. And then obviously performance on game day or whenever you're testing.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe I would default to it the same way I kind of look at sort of motivation, is I'd rather have it and not I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I'd rather be able to rely on, being disciplined and committed to an approach than actually needing something here that's like, that's what I'm motivated to do, and that's always on the horizon of this thing that is pushing me through this external motivating source. I kind of carry that through to this. I'd rather be able to see a benefit maybe from music or from external stimulation and these other higher arousal states. I'm confident that if I need that on a particularly low day, maybe I can dig in and add something in there. But I don't want to get to the point where I'm so used to every single training session being determined by hype that if it were to go away, or if something went wrong in a meet or something, that I'm not able to function without, that prepare for chaos or whatever, I don't know. It's a...
Well, let me, I kind of wanted to say something, and I hope, well, Eric, are you going to say something? I was going to add something to this and kind of steer off, but if you have something to say, then go for it.
Yeah, just real quick. I think if you're somebody who gets hyped up for top sets and heavy days and things like that, that's fine. But if you're having to hype yourself up for, triples at 70% or something like that, yeah, that's not going to be the most sustainable approach to training.
Yeah.
And then just in
there you go.
In meet conditions, I think a little more aggression is usually good, but obviously we want to keep it to the point where you can still maintain technique. You don't want it to be something where if they're a conventional deadlifter, they just go to extreme rounding because they got too hyped up and just can't pull themselves out of that position, something like that, which is actually pretty common with
I was gonna say that's like so common
for people getting overly hyped for deadlifts and then just completely losing position and it just all goes to crap. So
I can't stiff leg this, bro. Come on, 102% stiff leg PR on the way.
Yeah, and I just had one more question I kind of wanted to spin off with that. Why do you guys think there's, at least in some situations, differences between the lifts in terms of arousal? Like with squat, for example, do you think it's because people are more anxious about that movement or maybe even fearful of it?
You want me to go, Ben?
Well, you were the one who gave examples of different levels of kind of arousal for your different lifts, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, I mean, like for bench, I don't think most people get that amped up because maybe it's just not as many muscles working through your body as, say, like a sumo deadlift or a deadlift or conventional deadlift. It's just not as taxing as overall. You're lying down on a bench, versus a deadlift where literally every single thing from your head to your toes is like contracting to try to muscle this weight up, in a sense. And, I would say obviously deadlift and squat being more taxing overall. So probably going to need more hype or aggression or whatever you want to say to make it, that much higher or that much better in a competition or a 1 rep max test.
That actually kind of reminds me, and sort of what Eric was saying too, of the last year for the prime time slot, where we gave our music selections, and some people would just kind of throw out whatever songs, and I remember being very intentional about the songs that I picked for each of the lifts, and I picked the order that I went with my music selection was the first one was for the squats, it was very much like the lyrics that I was going with, they were super positive, and it was a high energy song. It was like this kind of self-affirming, I can do this sort of thing. It was still really high energy, but it was also with a really motivating feel. I think it was a Skillet song, and it's called Invincible. It's called Invincible by Skillet. That was the song, and it was very much, and I'm like, I feel invincible, I'm going to go and I'm going to squat this weight. And then for the bench press, I actually think that that's the lift I need the most hype on, because that's the one where I don't care about it, because I don't have as much of a love for that lift. And so for the squat, it's like, I need to do this or else I'm going to get squished and die. And so I need that energy and that reaffirming kind of that. And even when I'm not listening to music now, because I haven't trained with music since it's been at least June since I've listened to music while training. And so, but the same kind of mental space that I have to get to perform is I need kind of the self-affirmation of I'm still giving, my approach is generally still, I'm going to try and give my best effort in that moment. That's what I try to default to, but there's more of kind of a positive, optimistic feel when I'm squatting of like survival and getting through this. Bench press was Guren no Yumiega, which is a Japanese anime opening, and it's just pure hype. It's just pure, I don't understand the words, I don't need to, it's just pure energy of like, if my face is shaking when I'm doing it, then I'm not going to undersell it, because a lot of times I go out to a bench press, and because I'm not I don't care about it as much, which I'm always trying to work on, right? But it's like I don't have the same kind of love for that lift.
So you're almost like forcing yourself to care more by hyping yourself up more.
Like almost elevating my energy for that specifically, because then it's like, well, I don't know how to do it with my hands, I might as well push a thing off that's trying to squish me. And then for the deadlifts, it was Nearer My God to Thee by Vocal Point. It's a Mormon a cappella song, and it's like, I would classify it as more of like a deeper level of motivation, where like I think it can be a highly motivating song, but it's not like highly energetic. It's just my music major background pops up and I'm hearing like chords that are like, that's a really rich, juicy chord, and lyrically it's calm and affirming. So I bring myself down so I don't overhype for a deadlift. But that was kind of the way that I structured that. And it's not, you know, it's not always that way, but that's kind of how I would, for myself, maybe look at the lifts is maybe the variation of like of external arousal that I feel like can help my performance in those individual lifts. And I haven't thought about that much since then. But then Chance, you're saying that you need to go like get your energy and just get that squat, and I'm gonna drop down and I'm gonna stand up no matter what, where it's like maybe I can't do that so much on a deadlift.
I think that's more common for me and you. Like I in my head, I would assume that most people with like a more technical lift, like a sumo deadlift, it's gonna be more, you know, calm, soothing, or, you know, more light versus, you know, a squat. As far as just the technical, you don't want to ruin any kind of technical cues that you run through like normal. In my opinion, I would say maybe conventional deadlift would be a little bit different just because it's a little bit easier as far as the checklist that you're going through.
Maybe.
It's interesting that you both like to be a little bit less hyped for deadlift. And just to kind of segue, we actually had a question about sumo deadlift and some of the preferred technique cues, so maybe you both can touch on that a little bit.
Okay.
You want to start, Chance?
Yeah, I can start. There's a couple things that I like to do that are very different than most people, and I think it's the mentality is spending the least amount of time down in the bottom portion of the lift as possible, right? So like when people are just kind of huddled over there, they're losing a lot of the tightness, you know, from their core. Their lats are a little bit looser. Everything is just not as tight to the bar. So when they go down, they're holding it, their position, they're kind of just set up, and then they'll grab the bar, they'll brace, they'll lock in. And then after that, it's been like, 5 seconds usually, and everything has come loose a little bit more. So I've talked to a couple people, Jamal Browner, and several other lifters, telling them like, hey, you know, let's start with your chest up higher, lats locked in, you know, not necessarily grip and rip the bar, but you're going down, you're grabbing the bar, it's locked in, and you're going. You're not wasting too much time down there and, you know, getting a little bit looser than, you know, what I would think is optimal just to generate the most force off the floor. You know, and not necessarily to say you need to jerk the bar off the floor. You lock your lats in, that's locked in, you grab the bar, that's locked in, and then the force from your legs and, you know, hamstrings, glutes, it's all contracting, and then the bar is going up. So I think, I don't want to break down every single little tiny thing that you need
maybe
to do.
The idea
but that's the idea roughly that I would say is going to be more conducive to the max strength that you can hit for yourself. Maybe not necessarily that's the most repeatable, but I know in my head that that's the strongest version of whatever force that you can apply to a sumo deadlift. So yeah, Ben, you can go.
Well, I would say like that sounds like maybe prioritizing, making sure that you're not losing or degrading the potential stretch reflex you get, or of having the fresh setup down there, and having some sort of weird isometric kind of fatigue starting to take place on the musculatures, like you're setting up and your glutes or your hamstrings or your quads or hips are like, just to be in that position should be a lot of tension, right? Like if you can hang out down there for any length of time, you're probably not in a very solid starting position to be able to generate force. Maybe is that?
Yeah, like say like you're in a sumo stance, right? You're reaching down for the bar. Okay, your legs are almost in full extension. You know, your hamstrings are stretched out. Everything is like active right now, and I see people like sitting there for maybe 10 seconds or whatever, you know, in their head running through everything, and by that time you may have drained out 1, 2, 3% of your overall strength just by sitting down there for that long.
Right.
To me, that's what I'm thinking in my head when I am a little bit quicker setup is just the easiest way to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would agree. I think that with most things, right, you want to don't go intentionally slower than you need to, right? Like go as quickly as you can, as perfectly as you can, like as quickly as you can set up consistently and do that, but don't waste time overthinking it maybe.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it really is kind of that acceptance of the discomfort where you hear people sometimes like, oh, sumo this, or conventional, like any of these lifts, like, oh, it's really uncomfortable for me in that position. It's like, are you uncomfortable because you're in a bad position, or are you uncomfortable because you're feeling that built up tension from getting into a tight, packed position that like you're primed, that spring is pushed down right now, you're primed to generate force, and it's all built up, and some people like maybe hit the release valve a little too much. Like I like to set up as much as possible before I actually get to the bar. So I'll set my upper back, like my feet are in. I put my feet in the place they need to be. My upper back gets set. So I feel tension all the way through my lats and through the core, trying to be as stable as possible. And then on the way down to the bar, I should be building tension. It should be. I shouldn't just be able to reach down and have and again, my particular setup, where I'm building tension so it's super uncomfortable, and then when I have my hips come back, that is purely for the function of being able to get fresh air in there. Because I've tried to go straight from when we were Eric, you might remember when we were getting ready for the deadlift meet at the Arnold when I was wearing the suit. There were a couple of times where I would just try to, I can't hang out down there and set my grip. That's when we switched to the hook grip because I could set it faster. Mm-hmm. And I'd go down and I'd try to lift it and I'd stand up and I'd pass out like every single rep. If I needed to get down there. There were so many times where I turned around, and it was a good thing I wasn't live streaming back then because people would have saw some stuff they'd be really concerned about. But it's the idea of it's almost necessary. Like I don't do that little hip pull back to relieve that tension just because it looks cooler because I saw someone do it. It's like I need enough air to stay conscious throughout the entirety of this lift, and then the hips go back into that same position. But I see some guys will lose all their tension because they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to build up a stretch reflex by shooting my hips in there. And it's like, make sure that everything you guys are doing has purpose to it, kiddos. Don't just do it because you saw someone else do it and it looked cool. So,
definitely.
Yeah. What do you think, Derek? Did you have some other stuff in your brain, or?
A little bit. I think the takeaway there was just kind of not waste too much time at the bottom and try to get as almost uncomfortably tight as you can when you're setting up there. And that's kind of something that you see with the bench press as well. If you're comfortable in your arch on bench press, you're probably not getting as much out of your arch as you could.
Right.
Yeah.
No, if you were to push it to get uncomfortably tight, get your touch point up a little bit higher, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, in general, right? We exist in the sport built on discomfort. 100% effort in any one of these lifts. Like I always talk about that with the hook grip. You come back to it, and it's does it ever stop hurting? No, you just get really good at dealing with discomfort. You may not react as much to it, but nothing's really changed about it. You may not be as reactive to taking a 90% single on your back for the squat. You walk it out, it's always going to feel heavy, relatively speaking, to what 90% feels like for you. And if it feels easier than that, then it's probably not 90% anymore. And that kind of feeling of discomfort kind of throughout all the lifts that you're doing really has a tendency to carry through, and through practice and working on these things, spending more time experiencing those discomforts makes them feel less daunting or unfamiliar, and you get better at dealing with that discomfort. And that's one of the things I like to think about, not just with lifting, but you can carry that through to other parts of your life. And that's why I think it's so helpful to use these kinds of lessons and ideas throughout other parts of, not just for powerlifting, because the sport in itself is like, it matters to us, but you can use it for so much more. So I think we're getting pretty close here, right? Is that maybe one or two more questions?
We got a little bit more, yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything you guys wanted to talk about, just as a side kind of thing?
since we're on the topic of technique in general, I think we could touch on squat a little bit too.
Mhm.
And you guys visually have pretty different squats. Chance is definitely more aggressive in his descent. What are some things just in general that you guys think about on squat?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, for me, I think mine is just such a more natural movement for me that I don't have to think about it as much as I think other people would. You know, most of my squat is, it's just the bracing, you're locked in. I try to tuck my elbows underneath the bar a little bit, descend down right, past parallel, and then just push up with everything. Push up with my arms, push up with my, obviously my legs, push up with my upper back, everything driving forward and up into the bar. But besides that, I'm trying to spread as much of my force across my foot, not so much just digging into the heels on my foot. It's spread out evenly across both of my feet. Besides that, I think for me it's pretty just go up, go down.
Do you have
or go down, go up.
Do you have any specific cues when you're starting the descent then? Is it just, I mean, you're setting all those positions, but then the next cue that I heard from that is like I'm set, and then the next thing is like once I've gotten past parallel, then I'm putting all of my force up. Is that did I miss something there?
Yeah, I mean it's brace, lock that in, elbows tucked down, and just slowly. I try to slowly move my body down, just to the point where I'm close to parallel, and then my body dips on its own a little bit more, and then you're right there, and then move up.
And hope for the best.
And hope for the best. hey,
I'm not going to be the one throwing shade here. Eric can make that choice himself. I'm not. I think just based off of that description, I might be a little bit more intentional with my descent. It's a little.
That's kind of what I figured. I thought it'd be interesting to touch on that.
Say that. I don't want to just come out and say that. Like I think about this stuff. This kid's going over here dropping a squat down.
I think, I mean, honestly, for me, it's so much more just natural to do. I don't know. Like, I know people tell me that all the time. Oh, it's so, inconsistent or so fast or it's way too, it's always been too fast. But for me, it's always worked. And I've been pretty healthy, especially as far as, like, my lower extremities go, to be able to do that. And whether that's just me, my one genetic anomaly trait, I don't know. But I think a lot of that is just person to person, man. I've seen some people drop pretty fast, and some people have to inch, even raw. Yeah. So,
to be fair, though, you've started controlling your squats a lot more than in the past. If you compare how your squats look now to 2 years ago, it's completely different.
I can't watch some of the stuff from like.
Well, it was too natural back then. Now it's like half natural.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
you used to just basically slam onto your calves as hard as possible.
2 years ago, I can't watch that shit anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think I have moved in the past few years even more close to the idea of just absolute control. If I can squat it, I don't feel like it's too ridiculous of a statement for me to say that I think I could probably come close to pause squatting it. Just the feeling of stability that I have when I'm like just at the bottom of a squat, it really is just about control. I went up to Canada and I was working with my friend Adam and his movement coach Rob from SportCore. Check out SportCore, everybody, on Instagram. But basically the idea of bracing not necessarily through circumferential expansion, but the idea of like the deep lower abdominal wall locking the pelvis in. And then I've been working a lot on my glute mobility and my hip mobility so that when I get even with a wider stance, through control, I draw myself back in really heavily to the glutes. I don't have a whole lot of forward knee movement, and the idea of getting as low as possible without like resisting kind of that butt wink that happens when a lot of people bottom their squats out, and kind of just drawing myself back instead of down as much, because like Chance, you're talking about how you're locked in and then you're moving down. I don't even think of it as moving down. I think of it as moving back.
Well, I think that's the difference, right? Do you squat in flats?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit of a heel too, so
Right.
that kind of thing may make a little bit of a difference.
for
And
sure.
I'm
I
also
mean,
a little
there's-
bit closer stance too. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah,
things that
yeah,
just
yeah.
even in setup are different, but in terms of like my approach, I don't feel like it's as natural of a movement. I very much am approaching it with, because there's 8 years of video of me doing stuff really a lot differently looking. Like my natural technique is garbage on everything. So I've had to really manufacture. It really is. If you're saying like 2 years ago, if you watched your squat, then it's like, oh, I can't even watch that anymore. I mean, there's video on YouTube that people could watch anytime, dating back to longer than that, where I can't watch those. And even some stuff from the beginning of the year, I've changed pretty drastically and been pretty intentional about trying to improve my control in some of those like specific positions where I feel really confident that at any point of the way down my squat I can stop it there. And I don't know if that's like necessary for everyone to feel like, but with my maybe the way that I'm built, the squat feels super unnatural and uncomfortable. Like whenever I'm doing it, that's not a movement that's like, yeah, I'm just excited to go squat today. I enjoy the process of working on it to get better, but it doesn't feel at all natural to me. And yeah, I guess I'm wondering if that's what Eric was trying to get at, if this is an intervention for a chance to control his squats more. But
No.
or to just have me be a little bit more aggressive on the descent. That way now it's fair. Now we both got told by the coach piece we need to fix what we're doing.
No, I was just curious because I know you guys are definitely different in your squatting style and the way you approach it.
Thinking about it now, yeah, ours is very, very different.
Yeah.
Like everything about it, shoes, stance width, everything. Yeah, I my like true max, it's like this is so heavy. This is so heavy, and I couldn't slow. Like I have to really.
Well, you're a little more reliant on the stretch reflex.
Yeah. But even
And
so, like that last meet where I hit that PR by like 2.5 kilos. I mean, that was all I had, but I didn't feel at all, like you say, comfortable with it, but more natural to the movement, I guess.
Right. I wonder if like one of the changes, because I was seeing maybe some of my own dependence on more of a stretch reflex, and I wonder if, because it's been a couple years, like probably since the time that Eric, you and Hanny and I have been kind of working together to try and make me less bad at all this stuff. Just where I've really kind of doubled down on the idea of being able to always be in a position where no matter what I can generate force there and not have as much. I think that's kind of been in all the lifts, in the squat, in the bench press, and in my deadlift. I've been really I'm really mean to myself in terms of self-critique of things that I can improve and fix from session to session. Where I used to be a little bit more convinced that I was closer to right, and now I'm closer than I've ever been, and way harsher with my self-criticism on like I could have fixed that, or I had this little positional error of like did I pass through a spot in that lift where I was losing where if it had stalled there I wouldn't have been able to generate as much force, like in terms of like leverage optimization and sort of like from a biomechanical spot, like what are the spaces or what are the areas in space that I am at where I can generate the most force within this movement pattern, and trying to have more control throughout that entire thing and be less reliant on something like momentum or stretch reflex or things like that. So maybe that's
I had one more thing. Oh, go ahead. Are you going to say something there?
Yeah, I was going to say I don't think that complete control like that is absolutely necessary, but I've worked with people who can pause squat 90+% without a problem, and I think that's just a sign that they're efficient with the technique that they have. But somebody who's a high bar squatter who relies a lot on the stretch reflex out of the bottom, a lot of forward knee travel, stuff like that, they're probably not going to be able to pause squat very close to their max, because that first basically third of the movement is more reliant on momentum and getting a nice stretch reflex out of the bottom.
And I do want to clarify, Chance, before you say something, that I'm not trying to say that my approach is like right for everyone in that, but based off of my own lifting history and some of the things that I've had problems with in the past, I'm pretty confident that it's like the right approach for me in terms of being consistent. Where before I was much less consistent in the past with my squat when I would sometimes sacrifice those positions for momentum. And so that's all I'm trying to say is like, this is very talking about my issues and not necessarily what everyone else should always be aspiring to do. So Chance, if you were gonna.
No, I mean, I had another thing I kind of just wanted to talk about since we're so close now is like Raw Nationals. I know that we have a team going. I know me and Eric kind of talked about how many we have as far as just him or like my people. How many do we have as like a whole team, like with TSA? Do you know?
I don't know the total number that we're going to have this year, but I know we're going to have a full open team competing and trying to rack up some points with that, so that's going to be exciting too. I think as a whole, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller than last year. I've heard some rumors that we're around 900 recently as far as signups, and I think last year, what were we at, like 1,200 at this point?
1,200,
I
yeah.
need to sign up.
With only like 1,150 actually showing up, right? It was 11 something, yeah.
And I do know a handful of people who haven't signed up yet.
Yeah, I need to do that.
I'm sure that's going to happen over the next few days, but don't forget. What is it? Sunday's the last day, I think.
Is it Sunday?
Yeah.
I'm gonna do that right after done with this, boys.
Hey, it's like $175 for like the junior division, open division, a T-shirt. So like I'm waiting. I'm waiting till I get paid because
just for like if you're doing
it's
just
like
one thing, like
125.
I'm just kidding.
It's like 125 and then 35 or 30 for another division, and then like $20 or $15 shirt.
I'll do the 125. I'm gonna live that life. I think that's good enough.
But I mean, think about how much money they're making for this. Like, realistically, it's gonna be, even 800. Even if it's only 800, we should, like last year. I know we had like fresh Alico bars, nice plates, nice warm up area. I would really be terrible if we didn't get at least, really decent training equipment like in the back room or that kind of thing with how much overall money they're making, and it's at least in my opinion. I don't know,
they're running a reduced number of platforms, right? It's not 5 this year.
It's not 5, it's like 3
as of right now. The plan is for 3. They may have to extend that to 4 and maybe find a different room because it's not a very big room to compete in. So it's probably going to depend how many entries float in the next few days.
Was it the same place you went for the
NAMPs?
Yep.
Yeah, NAMPs.
Yeah. It's literally you get off the plane, you get off the little shuttle, and then you go up escalators and you're there. And it's right there. You pass by a Chick-fil-A and then you go up there. So everybody
so everyone knows, in case you were curious. I never knew what it was called.
We could do a whole episode on nationals.
Chick-fil-A.
In a couple weeks or something.
Oh yeah, let's do that for sure. I'm down. But I had to make sure we talked about the equipment because I know, especially how many people are going to be there. Like they need 3 warm-up areas for each platform, so 9 at least minimum. And then what about people that are going to be training there like during the week? So say someone has to be there the whole week. they need to get like a training area, right?
Is
At
this
least
your
one,
official
probably.
outlet to talk
That's-
to the heads of the USAPL?
I don't
Because I have
know.
a feeling they're not going to see
They're
this.
not going to hear this.
And we should have led with that, because then I could like link it to him instead of like, hey, 59 minutes in, go ahead, and this guy's going to go off on this rant about how you're not doing enough to warm-up platforms.
There's no other alternative motive to this. I'm just purely stating it just to talk
Yeah,
about.
okay.
I do think he'd probably be able to get back in the warm-up room in the evenings. Kind of like when Ben came out last year, he had to do some training, finish up some training during the Raw committee meeting on the first day.
That's true.
I think they'll probably allow that in some cases.
That's when we all met for the first time. That was the first hugs we got.
In
boys.
person, yeah,
First
for sure.
hugs.
Yeah. Hey, but no, like at Keller's meet that he ran for the one that I did, Pan Am's, like a couple months ago, they shut down things early, and then like there's no other options to go train anywhere, like realistically in the area.
That would be unfortunate. Go to Disney and try to squat a mascot or something. I don't know.
So I
Go
think
in
that's
with
all I had.
low expectations, and maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I'm not.
So
I don't know what we're gonna have. I'll fly in on Wednesday. I haven't signed up, but I already have my flight plans figured out.
Haven't decided if you're doing it yet.
It's gonna be. Yeah, I'll get there late Wednesday, and then I think the 105s compete Saturday. Chance you'll lift on Friday, right?
Friday night, yeah.
Friday night. I do like that. I like that it's not early morning. I remember last year you guys had to weigh in at like 6 a.m. or something.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, no thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that to be a chance today. That 3-hour time difference. I am not. Next year.
I didn't like getting texts about body weight at 4 a.m.
No, don't say that.
You guys want to go into that now? Is that the
No, we'll save it.
our weight
We can
last
save it.
struggles? Okay.
We can save it for another day.
All right. Well, yeah. So that's, I guess, the conversation, and we're gonna. Who knows? We might have some more of these. Maybe we'll just have them for us, or maybe we'll share them with more people. Who knows? But this is kind of a fun thing. So, thank you, Coach Beast. Thank you, Friend Beast, for hanging out and having some of these talks. Do you guys have anything else you want to kind of say to end it out, or are we good?
Always a good time. Thanks for having us.
That was great.
All right, friends, and go bye.